Hey friends, Vanessa Fernandez here with the Enneagram Workshop. This is our coaching conversations on stereotypes and how that can keep us from figuring out our actual type. And I love teaching on this because I do many typing sessions, and always the thing that is the hang up, always the thing that is the block and the obstacle to arriving with confidence at someone's type is, without a doubt, stereotypical behaviors. Behaviors that we've all been told ascribe to a certain type and yet don't fit us. And all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I'm not a 2. Well, maybe I'm not a 7. Well, maybe I'm not a whatever because I don't do this behavior. And listen, it happens to me. It happens to all of us. The shift to want to make Enneagram about behavior and then having to pull it back and say it's about motivation. We constantly want to shift there. Oh, maybe I can change my behavior with the Enneagram. Maybe it's a tool for behavior modification. Oh, maybe if I'm not this behavior, if I don't have this behavior, then I'm not that type. This is not how the Enneagram works. And when we try to use it that way, it creates confusion and it creates even some hurtful things, some things that can really kind of mess us up. And so I want to do my best to try and realign us back to what the Enneagram is intended for, which is an exploration of the motivations that spur us on to do all of the things that we do. And those motivations can manifest in behavioral patterns that we can see, especially when those who are being studied all ascribe to a similar socioeconomic and ethnic and national background. And so, a lot of Enneagram work that you may be consuming may be all coming from a particular perspective that has the only experience that has been studied or the only experience that has been talked about is maybe a very North American, white-centric, upper middle class experience, right? And so if that becomes the standard, if those behavioral patterns, which have been influenced by a very homogenous kind of environment, and so if those behavioral patterns are sort of held up to us as the standard, this is what all 7s look like. This is what all 2s behaviors, patterns tend to be. This is what all 5s tend to manifest as. First of all, that can be hurtful to those who are not a part of that homogenous group. And second of all, it can be very limiting and confusing when you are trying to figure out your type and maybe you don't fit in with that homogenous group, or maybe you've had life experiences that have caused your core motivation to manifest in a way that is a deviation from the standard, the stereotypes. And so a lot of work that I am interested in doing and that I'm partnering with some other colleagues to do is to try and sort of expand and make the Enneagram a little bit more inclusive. And so what that's going to require, though, is for us as a community to really be mindful that we are pulling away from behaviors and back into motivation, that we are asking the why question. So for example, let's see if I can do one for every type, but I'm going to start with 1s. So in this day and age, in this season of our lives, there are lots of thought leaders, Brene Brown being one of many, who have helped us think more clearly about perfectionism, right? Perfectionism is a shield for shame. Perfectionism is not something that is attainable. Even, in past generations, think about this. In past generations, when you were typing something on a typewriter, if you made one mistake, the ramifications of that mistake were quite high. You would have to get that little white piece of paper and put it over the top of the mistake and try and fix it. And it was not easy to fix. And so the pressure to be perfect is something that we have felt less and less as we have computers that can easily delete, computers that can easily modify, things that we can easily switch and change, the cost of not being perfect is less in one sense in this day and age. And then we also have thought leaders who have studied what perfectionism does to us, that it's not a healthy thing. And so in this generation right now, perfectionism is not something that a lot of us are striving for because we know we shouldn't. All right, hear that. We know we shouldn't strive for perfection because thought leaders have helped us see how that is not a healthy thing to do. So now when I have typing sessions with type 1s and they say, I don't feel a need to be perfect, I could say, well, that behavior is always a sign of a type 1, and so that behavior is telling me you are not a type 1. Or I could pull away from behaviors and go to motivation, and I could ask the second question. Why do you feel like you don't need to be perfect? And then when I hear the answer is, because I read something that an expert said that perfectionism is not something we should strive for or that is healthy for us, what am I hearing? I'm hearing dependent stance. I'm looking to experts and those outside of me to validate my identity. And I'm looking for what I should and shouldn't do. And so if perfectionism has become something that I shouldn't do because an expert told me, guess what? That's a type 1 motivation. And the type 1 motivation is now manifesting in a behavior that actually doesn't really want to be perfect. Because the type 1 fear is that they are hopelessly flawed, and the desire is to be good enough for those around them, the authorities around them, to approve of. So if the authorities around them are not approving of perfectionists, the type 1s are not going to want to be perfectionists. Do you see how the motivation can manifest differently? But when we ask those curious questions, why do you feel this way? Why do you want to do this? What are you afraid of when you're trying to not be perfect? What are you trying to get for yourself? Well, I'm trying to do things the right way. And perfectionism is not the right way anymore. There you go. We know that you're a type 1 who doesn't want to be perfect. This is so important, guys. This is so important as our society changes. This is so important as we seek to expand our definitions and our understanding of how each motivation manifests. The minute that we narrow down to a small section of behaviors, of stereotypical behaviors, and they might even be things that you wouldn't think of. Like, who would think that perfectionism is a stereotypical type 1 behavior? Like, maybe having a perfectly clean house, yeah, that's a stereotypical type 1 behavior. But perfectionism, no, that's the Bible. That's what all type 1s want. But is it? But is it? Getting down to that core behavior, to that core desire, to that fear that every reaction that every type is having is a reaction to a fear and a belief that there's a lack of something in the world. There's a lack of goodness in the world. I have to be good. And if perfectionism is not the right thing to do, then I'm not going to do that. So you can see, that's just for type 1s. You can take it into type 2s, type 3s, type 4s. I had a type 4 who was signing up for all these activities in her community and all these things, and everyone thought she was a 2. And then I said, but why are you signing up for all these activities? Okay, that's the behavior, the Susie homemaker, the, do everything, the PTA mom, right? That's what a 2 looks like, right? In one certain environment that is very homogenous and very dominant in Enneagram world. That's what it looks like for that group. Okay, but let me ask you, my sweet friend who I'm typing with, why are you signing up for all these things? And then it came out, oh, I want people to stop asking me, so I just say yes. And it's my way of being unaffected by everyone else. Oh, so I'm hearing withdrawing type. You want to be unaffected by others. So you just say yes so that they'll stop asking. If I do this, it will cause less friction for me than if I try to say no. The motivation is not the motivation of a type 2, it's the motivation of a type 4. And of course, there were other things as well that confirmed her 4-ness, but you can see how staying with those peripherals, staying with those external behaviors, staying caught up in those subtypes, staying caught up in the belief that the way Enneagram behavioral patterns have always been told to us is from one perspective that may not apply to much of the rest of us. And being curious enough to come back and back and back and back to that core motivation, to that core fear. So I am going to be posting later on today on my feed the language I would use that I'm hoping is more expansive, and I'm hoping to grow in this as I continue in my teaching, as I continue collaborating with other Enneagram experts who are outside of this one perspective that we've had for so long, which I'm grateful for that one perspective, but I'm excited to expand beyond that and have language that comes further down to the least common denominator. To have language that pulls further away from behavior and gets closer into that core motivation, so that all of us can have more clarity as we're trying to weed out stereotypes and settle into what is my core type, because once we get that, we can do the work. We can start applying the healing message to that core fear. We can start letting go of our ego. We can start moving into essence. And all of that only happens once we get to our core type. And I don't want behaviors to get in the way of that. We've got to pull back into that core motivation. So I'd love to hear if you have a similar story, if you got caught up in behaviors and you were able to find your actual type when you pulled down deeper into that core motivation. I'm going to be providing some questions as well. Stay tuned to my Instagram feed. I have so much good stuff coming for you guys around this idea of typing. I also have a class coming up at the end of this week. If you want to sit and it's an hour-long class, all the different challenges we have in typing. This is just one of them. There are multiple challenges we have when we're trying to figure out our true type. So I'm just going to break them all down. What are the challenges and how do we get around them? I want to empower you to be able to know your type, feel confident in your type. At the end of the class, there'll be a time for question and answer. If you need to kind of work around an area where you felt like you've drifted into behaviors and you want to pull back to motivation, I'm here for that. So stay tuned. Looking forward to having more conversations around this idea. And thanks again for watching.